where does this idea of it being a scam come from?
Service charges have come under a lot of scrutiny recently, understandably. You don't want to be paying for things you don't feel you're receiving.
It's not better than renting. You don't build any equity since almost all your payments go to interest rates for the first decade.
Generally, it is, in most areas, a lower rate of rent than you would be paying if you were renting privately.
Welcome to Shared Ownership Unpacked, where we break down the nuts and bolts of shared ownership. I'm Joe Bartlett, also known as the Homebuyer Coach, and I'm joined by Rob Horn from Southern Housing.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, and in today's episode, we're breaking down the basics of shared ownership, and we're really going to tackle that burning question head on. Is shared ownership a scam? In this episode, we're joined by our Sales and Marketing Director from Southern Housing, Vikki Walker. Welcome, Vikki, to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us. And Vikki, before we dive into this week's episode, can you give us a breakdown of who you are and your glittering career in housing?
Wow, okay. I've been with Southern Housing for just coming up for 10 years, working with shared ownership for all of that time. And before that as well, worked at another housing association with shared ownership, both from selling older properties and selling new builds. So yeah, I absolutely love what I do. Helps to have a great team around me, like you, Rob. But yeah, it's very worthwhile.
You make me blush. Okay, Vikki. So the first section of our podcast is called Quack Attack, and it's really brilliantly named after our mascot Quaxley, who I'm pretty sure you had a lot to deal with in terms of getting him in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's named Quack Attack, and the premise of it is we're going to give you 20 seconds to answer one question, and that's it.
Great.
It's pretty straightforward.
Absolutely.
Okay. Are you ready for your 20-second question?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Let's do this. In 20 seconds, explain shared ownership.
Well, you buy a bit and you rent a bit is probably the easiest way to describe it. You buy a bit based on what you can afford, what you can get with a mortgage and what you have as a deposit. And the remainder you pay a rent to the housing association before.
Absolutely nailed the answer. Brilliant. So with
Thank
that
you.
in mind, who would you say shared ownership is designed for?
Shared ownership is designed for very many people, and there is a misconception that it is for first-time buyers, which it absolutely is. It's a good way to give people an opportunity to buy what they can afford when they've perhaps coming from rented or moving out from home for the first time. But it is also for people who have owned before. So, for example, for families, if you've need to buy a home to accommodate your growing household need. A lot of people use shared ownership after having owned before to get a home that suits their needs. We also see people who circumstances are changing and need to perhaps downsize as well. But the fact that you've owned before doesn't stop you from using shared ownership.
Perfect. Okay, so it's not just limited to first-time buyers.
Nope.
It could be home movers as well, just as long as you don't own another property at the time.
Yes, yeah,
Perfect.
correct.
Brilliant.
Yeah, you can be selling and complete at the same time as you buy your shared ownership, but you just can't own another property at the same time.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Fine. So with shared ownership, they are leasehold properties. So what is a leasehold, and can I own the freehold eventually?
Yeah, it will depend on what type of home you're looking at. So if you're buying a house, generally houses are freehold. You will, with shared ownership, buy a leasehold element because ultimately the housing association will own the freehold.
Okay.
If you go to staircase, which I'm sure we'll come on to at some stage, you can end up purchasing the freehold from the housing association. So yes, you can own the freehold of a home that is originally shared ownership. If you're buying an apartment, that's slightly different because you're not buying the whole building. So apartments are always considered leasehold because you're not going to purchase responsibility of the whole building at that stage.
Okay.
Okay. And is there, I think when you use the term leasehold and stuff, I think people have this slight worry about length of lease and stuff. Can you give us a quick tidbit into kind of length of leases in terms of what shared ownership would offer?
Yeah, so most of our leases are around 999 years. So pretty substantial.
Wow. Yeah.
And we'll see most of us through. There are some forms of shared ownership leases that are shorter, and that could be older. If you're buying an older property, those leases will have deteriorated. Historically, leases might have been originally for about 125 or 250 years. So if you're buying an older shared ownership home, it's always worth checking out the length of the lease that remains.
Okay, so shared ownership then isn't just new builds, it can be older properties as well.
It can be,
okay.
Yes, yeah.
Well, that's good to know, because I think a lot of people think it's just new build properties, but the resales are available as well.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So say I'm a buyer and I'm looking into buying shared ownership.
Yeah.
What are the kind of risks and limitations with buying shared ownership properties?
I always think with shared ownership, you've got to make a decision that's right for you and get as much information as possible. So when you're buying into shared ownership, you need to understand, obviously, your obligations within the lease, which your solicitor will explain to you. You will have to pay your mortgage to your mortgage lender, so you have a relationship with them and requirements to keep up those payments, as well as paying what is a subsidised rent to your housing associations. You do have two payments to consider that you need to manage. Always worth getting independent advice when it comes to your finances, as I'm sure you can help us to explain a bit more, Joe.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, it's really about what you can afford.
And you said about the rent sort of being subsidised.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think for me, that's probably the one area that I least understand about shared ownership and how that really works and who that's subsidised by.
A shared ownership is often, for us, it's government funded, and we're using money to help support people into accessing their home ownership options. When you're buying a new build, it's fixed based on a percentage of the value of that home. And typically it's around 2.75% of that, which means that generally it is, in most areas, a lower rate of rent than you would be paying if you were renting privately. Always, again, do your research to see what prices are in your local area, but generally we find that those rents are cheaper and they are subsidised. So that's the reason for the subsidy. And what you will find, which is different again at the moment to what you've got with private renting, is that your lease will also mean that the increases to your rent are limited. So you won't suddenly get there's not a landlord suddenly saying, right, I want to put your rent up £200 this month. It's got a cap on it. And again, it's in your lease, and it will be something you can refer back to and make sure that you're happy with what that would look like.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, that is really good.
You mentioned about two payments, which I think, especially when I've been speaking to my buyers, is one big concern of theirs, because they think that because they're paying two payments, the combination of that's going to be more than it would be if you were going to have, just a single mortgage or just the rent. So what we've found is the combination of the rent and the mortgage is often cheaper than the equivalent property would be to rent or to buy, depending on mortgage terms and things like that, which is quite interesting.
It is, and again, it will be different depending on where you live, but it's when you're looking into shared ownership, I think just make sure you've got access to as much information as possible so you can make an educated decision. If the alternative is private rent for you, look at what it costs between the two. What are the benefits, and weigh up. If I've got an equity share in a home, is that going to be better for me longer term? What are my plans?
What works for you in terms of...
If you're looking at staying somewhere perhaps slightly longer term, those are the types of things that you really have to think about for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And if someone's still a little bit unsure about shared ownership, what would you say is their first step? What do they need to do?
I would start to actually contact some providers, make some inquiries. Our team's great. We're more than happy to spend a bit of time talking you through what you need to know and answering those really obvious questions. We still get asked as well, do I have to share with somebody if I'm buying with shared ownership? There's all those things that actually, they're not silly questions, and we're here to help explain those away. So I'd always say best to get yourself in contact with some of those providers. Start looking as well and getting a feel for what's in your area, looking at your options and, understanding what it is that you need and what's that going to cost me across, whether I'm looking at private rent, do I stay with family, shared ownership, outright buying, all of those things, and really just prepare yourself with the information.
And in terms of timescales, do people need to wait until they're ready to buy and got their deposit saved, or would you say that maybe it's best to do it even if you're thinking about buying in the future, just to build a bit of a plan first?
Always build a plan, definitely. And I think what we often find is that people don't necessarily realise that they could access shared ownership sooner than they realise, because deposit-wise, you're only putting a deposit on the share that you're buying. You're not having to subsidise the full value of your home. And that often means that you can access it sooner than you would think. Depending on your circumstances and what deal you can actually achieve through your mortgage, it could happen sooner. But I think it's always good to get that information earlier. Set your goals if you need to put a little bit more aside and understand how long that's going to take you.
Yeah, a lot of my buyers that I speak to, some of them I've been speaking to for, a couple of years until they've finally bought, because it's not just the deposit. It could be things like their credit score isn't quite there. There's a number of factors that can prevent you from buying. So yeah, I think the first thing they need to do is just inquire, look into it and see whether it's a future possibility for them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I guess what we're picking up on, for me, it feels like these are kind of key selling points of why shared ownership is what you were saying, more safe and secure than private renting as well, because there's that element of knowing you need to be ready to do it. Whereas with rent, you're going to have to front some sort of deposit. It's usually, say, your first month's rent or whatever. But it's very much it's accessible to you straight away, and there's no real looking at the future.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So whereas with shared ownership and open market sale, you have to be a bit more prepared. You have to have that long-term plan behind you to know, right, I'm going to be able to afford it from day one, and then year 2, year 3, year 4 sort of thing. So for me, that feels like it offers that more security because there's a little bit more of a thought process. That needs
absolutely.
To go to
Well, they call it the rental trap for a reason, don't they? Because as soon as you're in it and you're paying the amounts of rent that they are these days, how are you supposed to save at the same time? You just can't, can you? So
yeah, exactly. And there are going to be times when shared ownership may not always be the answer for you, and it depends on what your circumstances are and what your plan is. And if you're looking for a short-term solution, private renting probably still is the better option for you. But actually, if you're thinking, well, I want to put down little bit of, put down my roots somewhere, have a little bit of space and a bit of security for a bit of a longer period of time, then shared ownership's probably a good thing to look at as an alternative.
I think it's time we tackle this burning question that we sort of led on at the start, and that is, where does this idea of it being a scam come from? What from your experience, you've worked for 2 different housing associations, you've kind of seen it very much firsthand. Where do you feel like this rooted idea that it's a scam comes from?
I think there's some themes through service charges. I think it's often the thing that comes up that we read about in the press, where there's people feel that with shared ownership, their service charges are going up to extortionate rates. Now, service charges are a leasehold element. If you don't own the building, you will be paying towards costs and contributing to the upkeep of that building. So it's not a specific shared ownership issue. It is something from a wider leasehold side of things.
So if you're buying then a flat that isn't shared ownership, you're still going to come across these issues.
You're still going to be paying a service charge. And service charges have come under a lot of scrutiny recently, understandably. You don't want to be paying for things you don't feel you're receiving, but also to provide a lot of these services, costs have gone up. The cost of living crisis and the energy crises that we've seen mean that there are higher charges that we're seeing. And as as a buyer, that is going to hit in the pocket. As a housing association, we are monitoring. We have teams to try to keep those costs down, and they'll report to you to give you updates on your service charges over time, and if they're increasing, you'll get your statements and you'll be able to see. And we are signing up to charters that make us be as transparent as we possibly can around service charges. I think that's the important thing, is you want to know what you're paying for and why you're paying it. And that's one of the things that we have committed to providing. But yeah, it's something that if you are buying an apartment, you will be contributing to costs. So it is something you do need to consider as well. It is different with service charges than with your rent. So the lease does give you a cap on rent increases. It's not the same with service charges. So it is something you do need to consider as part of your weighing up when you're buying an apartment.
All right, so this next section of the podcast, Vikki, we're going to hopefully debunk some myths. We've picked some of these statements up from Reddit, from social media, from articles that we've read recently. They're all things that we think there's potentially an element of truth to, but they're very much phrases and sentences that have led to a little bit of clickbait, and they're used to kind of promote this idea of shared ownership as a scam, but from a very kind of uneducated way, we think anyway.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some of these statements out.
Yeah.
And we'd just love to hear your response. And I think, Joe, you'd be perfectly placed to also give a response to some of these too. So I will just dive straight in with the first one. I've heard complaints about leaks, flooded gardens, and structural issues to shared ownership new builds.
Well, again, that's not really just for shared ownership. I think any new build home, they all come generally. A new build comes with a defect period. There will occasionally be things that get picked up. You know, they're built, no one's lived in it, and the minute you move in and you start using it, there are things that might appear, and that's what a defect period is for. And that normally, a defect period is something that means that the contractor that's built it, the developer, has an obligation to come in and fix anything that hasn't been done properly.
Okay.
Really. And you can utilise that to make sure that any of those things do get picked up. But that's not unique, I would say, to shared ownership. I'd say that's if you're buying any new build. The benefit of buying with shared ownership is that because we're building, we have a relationship with the contractor who's building the homes for us. So because of that, we have a team of people that during the construction process are going in and out and reporting on the works that are being completed, making sure that the conditions are acceptable and to the standards that we require. And before they're finished, we do a snagging and a de-snagging process to make sure that everything is picked up. And at the point of then completing with us, if there's anything outstanding that might be any sort of cosmetic things or anything that we've agreed with that contractor to do, that's all noted, and all of those will be picked up by the contractor. So that's perhaps a little bit of peace of mind when it comes to buying a new build, that with a housing association, actually you've got an element of someone doing a bit of work to make sure that a lot of that snagging work is done for you.
So the next one is, it's not better than renting. You don't build any equity since almost all your payments go to interest rates for the first decade. So,
wow,
sweeping generalisation.
Yeah,
I would
really
say there,
is,
but
isn't it? So, I mean, equity is built by the increase in value, and if you're buying new, when you're purchasing, you're inevitably paying a new build premium. And this is one of the reasons when I said earlier on, it's about looking at what your circumstances are and whether it's right for you. If your focus is going to be about moving on and having built some equity, in the short term, that may not be the right thing to do, because if you've got, like you said earlier, you know, if there's other new builds on that development, you know, there's still a drive for those to be sold. Is that going to help add value to your home? That's something to consider. But ultimately, when it comes to building equity, it's going to be about the increase in value. Interest payable, really a lot of that is going to come down to the advice that you get from your broker and what mortgage deal, what the rate is of that deal.
Yeah, I mean that just sounds like someone that's on a bad deal with their mortgage in a way, but I don't know.
It looks as, if you've got a 25% share, your mortgage amount is such a small amount of that total value of the property. So you're not going to be really making equity from the mortgage payments.
No.
So really, if that's the reason that you're looking to buy shared ownership and you're going in at something like 25%, short-term equity increase probably isn't what you're looking at.
No.
It's the stability of having your own home with the hope that the values of the property increase over a longer period. That's where the equity is going to come from.
The last one on here is I did it and sold it for a profit, bought a freehold house. It serves its purpose. And I think that's perfectly landed. Like, I didn't even know what that was. I really didn't. So I think we've kind of landed on that statement perfectly. We've already spoken about it, and nailed it.
Which is great. And like any of these, if you go on TripAdvisor and you look up at a restaurant and you read the reviews, you go to the negative ones, right? And you're always looking at that. So people are drawn and see the negativity. But given how long shared ownership's been around for, there are so many more successful, positive stories that are out there that just get lost in the noise. And I really wish that, people could see more of those. And actually, we as a provider, we just want to be really honest about it, because there is no point in us setting someone up with something that's not right for them either. So we want to, by doing things like this, we're just helping people get the right information.
So the final part of the podcast is called the nest egg. So Vikki, what is your nest egg? What's one crucial bit of advice you could give to first-time buyers looking to buy their first home?
Ask the stupid questions. Don't be afraid to come and talk to us. You can visit us at events and exhibitions. You can pick up the phone, drop us an email. We are here to help you become informed about what is the right thing for you to do.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Great.
It's just, don't be afraid to talk to us and take some time, right? Like, don't rush into it.
It's a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's huge. What have you taken from today's podcast?
Yeah, so today's podcast ultimately is, people mentioning that shared ownership is potentially a scam. That's what we're here to address. And looking at the myths or the comments made, I think the majority of them are not really shared ownership issues at all. They're either new build issues or leasehold issues. And I think that's very important to acknowledge.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another one, my biggest takeaway from kind of what Vikki's been saying is it's about doing your research. And I think, that comes down to anything you buy, but buying a home is such a big thing in life that you really have to give it some time to research it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Vikki. You've been an amazing guest, and I've thoroughly enjoyed spending time with you talking about shared ownership. And it seems a shame, really, to have to end.
It does.
It does.
But we will have to wrap up the podcast. We could be here for hours talking, but you've got things to do and people to see, places to be.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for having me, and I really hope that this has been useful for people to be able to listen back to.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and please check us out wherever you listen or watch your podcasts for more episodes of Shared Ownership Unpacked.